believe it was Abraham Lincoln who said in his famous Getty Images address, "Do not judge a book by its cover." Since then, people have taken this nugget of wisdom for granted. But for a founding father, this idea is remarkably unfounded. In fact, considering that he later went into politics, he is not to be trusted, and we really should have been judging books entirely by their cover. Luckily, I'm here to restore balance to the world by creating a Goodreads account and spreading the truth to all that would have it. Immediately, I am faced with a dilemma, as I have to choose which genres are my favorite. So I did what I always do when confronted with a difficult decision and trusted my goblin instincts, which told me to frantically click all the buttons. So, I guess we're reviewing a cover from every one of Goodreads' genres. We're off to a good start with Ways of Seeing by John Berger. What I like about this cover is that it cuts the crap and just puts the text itself on the front cover. In a daringly practical deviation from what has become industry standard at this point, Ways of Seeing streamlines the reading process by inserting the text itself before the cover, relegating what most books would feature as a full-page illustration to a third of the page near the bottom. This removes the trepidation of opening the book in the first place, because by the time the would-be reader is examining the book to see if it is worthy of their time, they are already reading it. On reaching the mid-sentence break at the bottom of the cover, our subconscious impulse is to turn the page and continue reading to complete the thought. This intentional detail switches the cover's role from purely aesthetic to practical, which is a good thing because aside from that, there isn't much there. The only non-textual visual elements to be seen are the penguin logo and a 90-year-old painting that, without the context that literally surrounds it on the cover, feels out of place as the sole visual symbol of the book. On their own, each of these pieces are boring, but much like an actual book, it is the combination of these pieces that conveys a more significant meaning, and it is this combination that was subtly yet effectively engineered to capture the reader's attention. 4 stars. Book is titled Steve Jobs, covers a picture of Steve Jobs, gets the jobs done. 3 stars. I struggle to find any redeeming quality about this cover. The first thing you can see can also be used to describe the number of interesting things to look at. A giant 0. The colors chosen are dubious at best. The font is full of little irritations, from the imbalanced appearance of the N to the amorphous blob that is meant to be a number sign preceding the 1, and in fact the boastful #1 New York Times bestseller is infuriatingly aligned such that both the start and the end are just slightly to the right of the start and end of the word 0 beneath it. I suppose if I were forced to name one good thing about this cover, it would be that it certainly encourages people to spend most of their time within the pages, rather than looking at the barren wasteland that is the cover. Because Goodreads forces me to leave at least 1 star, my rating has begrudgingly gone from 0 to 1. Undeserved star. This book is cheap, and looking at the cover you can absolutely tell. The many fonts chosen range from acceptable, I guess, to why would you ever use that? The price tag looks like someone purchased Adobe Illustrator thinking, oh yeah, this is industry standard, surely it'll look good now, and then they just used the pencil tool and freehanded it with their mouse without bothering to redo it. Then tucked away in the corner as an afterthought is a drawing of a shoe that actually looks good. Normally it wouldn't warrant a second glance, but in context it almost seems a little suspicious, like maybe they realized how much of a mess the cover looked without it and Googled shoe chopping clip art to spice things up a bit. Overall, it looks like someone who does not design covers was forced to design one very quickly. Yet there's still somehow a bit of a charm to it all, and even with the multiple shades of red text with a garish pink background, it somehow isn't quite offensive to the eyes. 2 stars. This cover feels cozy. It's not overly polished, much of the lettering was done by hand, and although it features several clearly distinct characters, there's not a distracting amount of detail. The incorporation of the title itself into the spiderweb was a brilliant touch, and the gentle warmth of the colors combined with the slightly messy, sketch-like line work elicits the feeling of a book being read aloud by a loving family member. My one criticism is that it is a bit noisy with unnecessary advertisements. Full color edition, winner of the Newbery Honor, author of Stuart Little, it all feels just a little out of place in an otherwise straightforward and well-composed cover. Still, these aren't overly intrusive and you may not even notice them on first glance, so I don't think it's enough to outweigh everything this cover does right. 5 stars. Pretty colors. Cursive font that's actually legible is a plus. I know they're birds, but I can pretend some of them are dinosaurs. 4 stars. They didn't make the cover big enough to actually cover the page, so they just slapped it off center and then tiled it above and below. Random blocks of solid, ugly colors are supposed to make the text more legible, but the text is so small that it doesn't really matter anyway. Just a very ugly cover. 1 star. It appears that a Walmart smiley face sticker has grown massive red slimy appendages, but I can't really tell because it's just really weirdly zoomed in. There's not a whole lot to judge here. It's kind of boring overall. I like the font of the title though. 2 stars. Nothing spectacular here. The chalkboard or crayon text is a little charming, but aside from the Microsoft Word shape tool clouds, that's the only visual interest here. I am a fan of how the advertising bits are made unobtrusive by literally shoving them to the edges, making them fit around the main focus, as well as the careful color choice. 2 stars. 600 new recipes, more than 4,000 favorites, yet we don't get to see any of them. As far as covers that are just text go, this one isn't bad, though not a fan of the brownish gold color of the words "of cooking." But I feel like especially with a cookbook, it's missing out by not including any images of the recipes. In short, there's nothing on the cover to bring to mind the joy the title is referring to. 2 stars. I have mixed opinions on this cover design. The aggressive Mountain Dew color that dominates everything was a little difficult to get past initially, but the more I look at it, the less it bothers me. The dragon itself looks very cool, but it's subtle to the point where you don't even notice it at first glance, which is a shame since that seems to be the central focus. The orange tentacle things on the border look a little messy, honestly. I like that it balances out the colors a little bit, but I wish it could have been done more effectively. One of my biggest complaints is how elements of the design which are intentionally de-emphasized to be part of the background cover up so much of the text. The word "the" is a particularly egregious example of this. The amount of the word that's obscured makes it nearly impossible to decipher it immediately if you're just scanning briefly. The word "with" is a good example of how to incorporate this in an aesthetically pleasing and non-obstructive way, but there's altogether too much of it for me to be comfortable with. 2 stars. Captures the feeling of action fairly well, plenty of hidden details, but not necessarily a distracting amount. And the incorporation of the title into the archway is a nice touch, but please tell me why the random translucent uneven checkerboard pattern needed to exist at the bottom. 4 stars. This is a minimalist design done very well. Bold colors that don't clash, a large and readable title that's smoothly incorporated into the open eye iconography. Overall very striking, even if the great American read is like a sticker that you're frustrated to discover can't be peeled off. 4 stars. This is a beautiful cover. From the faint but detail-rich Zentangle-like framing around the title, the calligraphy of the title itself, the faint glow that both of those give off, the gradient of the sky, the striking landscape at the bottom, everywhere you look, there is something beautifully dreamlike to see. The fainter, angled lines near the top of the doodled border gives everything a depth that invites you to fall in, to study every detail it has to offer. It goes beyond being functional and even beyond pleasing to the eye. This cover is an art in itself that I would happily study without ever opening the book. 5 stars. Looks cool. Girl with wings, dude with horns. As many graphic novels do, it features characters on the cover. Nothing breathtaking, though. 3 stars. This is an interesting photograph that you study for about 10 seconds, think, that's cool, and then move on. 3 stars. As far as covers that are just text go, this one is decent. A coherent swatch of colors, none of which are ugly, and it adds a cute little flair by dotting the eye and sapiens with a fingerprint. It's clever to integrate a symbol for the human identity into the design of the title itself, but ultimately the visual interest is still very limited. 2 stars. This cover makes it very clear that you're supposed to read it not as The Shining by Stephen King, but as Stephen King's international bestseller, The Shining. Unfortunately, it's leaning pretty hard on that crutch because the 50% of the cover left over after taking into account the ugly Microsoft Word Art style Stephen King isn't very interesting. It's a pretty boring photograph, but it does at least have cool colors. 2 stars. Somewhat interesting, though I'll be honest, the main reason I looked at it so long was to see if I could spot the seams in the Photoshop job. This scrapes by as a very mediocre cover. There was a single idea, executed solidly. 3 stars. It's a little cheesy and the background is a bit of a cop-out, but it still holds some visual interest. The way that he's holding that scythe makes no sense, and why does it seem like the area of this image that the most intensity went into was the wrinkles in his pants? 3 stars. This is a very pretty cover. With the addition of the tiny silhouette, hidden landscape within the pencil becomes obvious at a glance. The colors are beautiful, the symbolism is quaint, even such tiny details as the position of the words "a memoir" are aesthetically pleasing where other covers would struggle to make them fit in. It isn't overly complex because it captures all the details it needs and nothing more. 5 stars. Yeah, yeah, he looks like he'd be a cool guy. 3 stars. This cover contains exactly the amount of detail needed to remain ominous. I just have one real complaint. There are clearly at least 2 people. Maybe do some fact checking before claiming that there are none. 4 stars. Though I typically give low ratings to covers that are composed of only text and nothing else, this cover just feels so tactile that I have to rate it higher. Looking at it, I want to reach out and scatter it into a cloud of dust. I can almost hear the sound it would make. 4 stars because imagining this is very satisfying to me. This cover does an okay job with the whole everything is desaturated except one vibrant object thing. Doesn't convey much information, but it is at least somewhat memorable. Actually, my favorite part of this cover is the font work of the main title. I'm a fan of how each letter is unique while still being coherent. 3 stars. How did somebody look at this cover and think, this is a good idea? What even is this? Someone had to think of this design, go through the effort to make it, and still stick with it in the end. They managed to take an ugly brown muddy mess and make it even worse by randomly slicing it up and then leaving gaps that aren't even all the same color. The alignment of the text is horrible, and they did the thing that unfortunately seems so common in publications of these classic literature where they slap a huge block of color over the top of the cover only to have the text not fill the available space properly. Except in this case, they do that twice. One of the times with the text too big, and one time with the text too small, and neither of them are centered. I guess it wasn't supposed to look good, this being a book for none and all. 1 star. Nothing to write home about. This cover is the kind of thing that you could just stare blankly at after closing the book because you're thinking about something. Just the tiniest bit of substance spread evenly across empty space. 3 stars. From a distance, this looks fine. Good, even. The curve of the pencil marking leading into the pencil itself is aesthetically pleasing, but the details of the pencil itself kind of put me on edge. How it's over sharpened and unevenly sharpened at that, so it looks like it'll break in the first 5 seconds. The fact that it's chewed to bits. Yeah, no thanks. 3 stars. This cover is very boring. Some gray graphite texture background behind plain black and white text. Not much to look at, no effort. 1 star. This is a pretty photograph, but not breathtaking. The text is fine, but not interesting. It's sunset, but without the sun. Overall, above average, but falls short of phenomenal. 4 stars. This cover, with its monochrome blue and starry backdrop, makes me feel like Stephen Hawking is returning as a Force ghost to impart wisdom upon us. It's a comforting feeling. 3 stars. This cover feels homemade, but not in a bad way. The spaceship looks like a model that someone spent hours carefully crafting and painting in a basement. Something about the cables dangling down from it and the shadow it casts kind of adds to this quality. The moon, I'm assuming that's a moon anyway, looks like it's made out of clay and slightly squishy. Craters look like they were made by the press of a finger or a pencil eraser. Comet racing by in the background stands out in this way. Perhaps a photograph positioned carefully in the background or edited in after the fact. Overall, a warm, nostalgic feeling, but there is one thing that confuses me slightly. The author's name has a strange brown color and font that reminds me of a label I might find on something in a hardware store. Maybe it's just me, but something doesn't really fit with the rest of the cover, and it sure seems to take up an awful lot of it. 4 stars. As with most only text on solid background covers, I'm not overly impressed with this design. This cover, however, has an added element of concern. Given the context, what is that splatter representing the asterisk meant to represent? Still, it is at least something interesting, and the colors, font, and alignment all create a cohesive feel. 2 stars. Is that meant to be hair? It looks stiff, more like a tumbleweed. Those little floating pieces just make it look like a bad Photoshop job. The way that it covers up the already thin letters, the strangely raw salmon color of the title, there's not much going for this cover. 1 star. This cover radiates the aura of a health store, which I guess is pretty on brand. Somehow manages to feel like there's a lot going on, despite the fact that it's just text. Yet even with all the different fonts, colors, and graphical elements, it still somehow feels coherent. Not that coherent, though. 2 stars. Okay, I know this is supposed to be a review of the cover, but let me just read you the official book description from Goodreads. Gorgeous, talented, and brilliant, NFL quarterback Ronan Smith has the world in his hands. But after losing his career and his fiancée in a car accident, he falls into a pit of grief and bad choices. When a mysterious girl shows up to his party, so not that torn up about it, he feels drawn to her and makes her his for one night. Former beauty queen Nova Morgan is on a mission. Scantily clad as a princess from a galaxy far, far away, she sneaks into a high-profile party to capture the attention of her favorite quarterback, but her hopes crash after an awful one-night stand. Fast forward 2 years. Broke and desperate, Nova returns home to Bluebell, Texas, where, by a cosmic twist of fate, her broody neighbor is none other than Ronan, the shiny new football coach who everyone adores. But he has no idea who she is. The Booster Club keeps shoving women at Ronan to keep him in town. His solution? He proposes fake dating to Nova. But things heat up for real under these Friday night lights when he realizes she's the one who slipped away. Has this jaded beauty found her forever baller? Or will his past keep them apart? Okay. Okay, I'm okay. The cover actually doesn't look that bad. I mean, I'm pretty sure the title itself was pulled straight from a template somewhere. I'm certain I've seen that exact combination of fonts before. But the colors are striking without being too aggressive, and the subject actually fills the cover while still leaving an adequate amount of white space in the background. That football is very clearly edited into the photo, though. 2 forever ballers out of 5. bet this cover is gorgeous. I bet it's better than any cover I've reviewed so far. A scene so breathtaking, the mere sight of it would transform my life forever. Unfortunately, it's moving too fast for me to see it. I gotta admit, I'm not a huge fan of the blur here. Colors get kind of muddied as a result, and it's hard to know what you're really seeing. It does imply motion, which I believe is the goal, but not in any sort of natural way. The after image title is a gimmick to go with that sense of motion, but it doesn't really sell itself very well because it's just not consistent. So it feels like a random decision to keep it from being just text. In the end, it's just slightly less readable, and my first instinct wasn't, oh, that's clever, or oh, yes, that fits nicely. It's, why did they do that? It's not awful by any means, though, just a number of disappointing mutations on what probably would have otherwise been solid components. In some cases, simplicity is superior. 2 stars. There are a lot of mediums at play in this cover. I think it's intending to go for a scrapbooky feel with the faux torn paper edges and mix of photographs and sketches, but it just feels unbalanced and haphazard, like maybe these are pieces that could be assembled into a scrapbook, but somebody shoved them down mostly off the cover so that there would be plenty of breathing room for the title, and then proceeded to cover up pieces of the title with random red spots or the curve of the wine glass sketch anyway. It feels messy. 2 stars. This cover looks very clean and organized. The understated shapes in the background all flow towards this focal point of the cover, which is an elegant golden symbol of the bird holding an arrow. The symbol itself is richer in detail than the plain monochrome geometric designs on the rest of the cover, but still not too noisy that it no longer stands out. And the ring surrounding it makes it fit in nicely with the larger pattern. If I had one critique, it would be that I'm not a huge fan of the font chosen for the title. It tries to stay rigid and angular, but for some reason breaks that pattern with the S, and that just doesn't sit well for me. Between the singular exception of the no curves rule there and the strangely irregular widths on the E and G, just not a look that I love. Still, 4 stars.